Every farmer alive today is farming inside a world that was built in a laboratory. The seed in the ground, the herbicide keeping the weeds back, the fertilizer feeding the root system, the very structure of the soil beneath the field. All of it shaped by results that came back from test tubes, greenhouses, and research stations that most people have never heard of. Some of those results changed everything overnight. Some took decades to be believed. Some were celebrated as miracles and later revealed to be something more complicated. And some were so quietly significant that the scientist who found them had no idea what he'd done until the whole world was eating because of it. These are 5 lab results that changed farming forever, and the stories of the men and women who found them. The tube that fed the world. Fritz Haber, Karlsruhe, Germany, 1909. On July 3, 1909, a German chemist named Fritz Haber produced something that had never existed before. In a tube 75 centimeters tall and 13 centimeters in diameter, a tube small enough to hold in both hands, he synthesized ammonia from nitrogen in the air. It doesn't sound like much. Here's what it means. Nitrogen is the essential ingredient of fertilizer. Without nitrogen, crops cannot grow. For all of human history, the only nitrogen available for farming came from animal manure, decaying organic matter, or the limited supply of bird guano, scraped off rocks on remote Pacific islands. That supply had a ceiling. The ceiling meant the amount of food the world could grow. Had a ceiling. The ceiling meant the number of people the world could feed. Had a ceiling. Haber broke the ceiling. His process, scaled up industrially by his colleague Haber-Bosch, made it possible to pull nitrogen directly from the atmosphere and turn it into fertilizer. It is estimated today that without the Haber-Bosch process, the Earth could only support about half its current human population. Every second person alive today owes their existence to a discovery made in a tube the size of a rolling pin in a German university laboratory. In 1909, Fritz Haber later won the Nobel Prize. He also helped develop chemical weapons used in World War I. The same mind, the same chemistry, used for both. History rarely gives you clean heroes. The crossing that doubled the harvest. Henry A. Wallace, Iowa, 1920s. Henry A. Wallace was 20 years old when he started crossing corn plants in his father's Iowa field. Not randomly. He had read the science. He understood what happened when you took 2 inbred lines. Corn plants weakened through generations of self-pollination and crossed them together. The offspring were stronger than either parent, taller, more uniform, higher yielding. Scientists called it hybrid vigor. Farmers called it a miracle when they finally saw it. But in 1920, nobody was selling hybrid seed. The seed companies said it couldn't be commercialized. The established farmers said open-pollinated varieties had worked for 100 years. Even most scientists were skeptical that the lab results would hold up in real fields. Wallace proved them wrong in plot after plot. In 1926, he founded a seed company called Pioneer Hybrid to bring hybrid corn to American farmers. The results in the field matched the results in the lab. By the 1940s, nearly all corn grown in the Corn Belt was hybrid seed. Yields that had hovered around 25 bushels per acre for generations climbed to 50, then 80, then over 100. Henry Wallace went on to become the United States Secretary of Agriculture and Vice President under Franklin Roosevelt. But the thing he was most proud of started with a young man in a field, hand-pollinating corn plants that nobody believed in yet. The dwarf that saved 1 billion lives. Norman Borlaug, Mexico, 1940s, 1960s. Norman Borlaug had a problem with wheat. The problem was gravity. When you breed wheat to produce more grain, more kernels per head, bigger heads, the stalk has to support all that weight. In wet or windy conditions, the wheat fell over, flat on the ground, impossible to harvest. All that yield, wasted. Working from a research station in Mexico, Borlaug spent years crossing wheat varieties, searching for one specific trait, a shorter stalk, a dwarf wheat that could carry a heavy grain head without falling over. After thousands of crossings, he found it. His dwarf wheat varieties produced yields 2 to 3 times higher than traditional varieties. They were introduced to India and Pakistan in the 1960s, at a moment when those countries were facing the real possibility of mass famine. The results from Borlaug's greenhouse went into the fields of South Asia and changed what was possible. India's wheat production more than doubled within 5 years. Pakistan became self-sufficient in wheat. The United Nations estimated that Borlaug's work saved over 1 billion lives. In 1970, he received the Nobel Peace Prize, the only agronomist in history to do so. He accepted it by saying that the Green Revolution was not finished, that the work was not done. He kept breeding wheat until he was 95 years old. The $5 patent that remade agriculture. John Franz, Monsanto Laboratories, Missouri, 1970. In 1970, a Monsanto chemist named John Franz was working on a research project that nobody else at the company wanted. It was a dying program. The results hadn't been promising. Other chemists had passed on it. Franz took it anyway. He was testing organophosphate compounds, trying to find something that could control weeds. One compound, number 602 in a long series of tests, came back with results unlike anything anyone had seen. It killed every plant it touched, every weed, every grass, every broadleaf. But it broke down in the soil within days. It left no residue. It was relatively non-toxic to mammals. It was, by the standards of 1970, about as close to a perfect herbicide as anyone had ever produced. Monsanto named it glyphosate. They sold it as Roundup. Farmers on research trips to Hawaii in 1974 and 1975 saw it in experimental plots and could not believe what they were watching. Weeds gone, soil untouched, no need to plow, no-till farming, which had been theoretically possible, but practically difficult, suddenly became viable. No-till acres in the United States grew 2.5 times in Roundup's first 10 years. John Franz received $5 from Monsanto for the first glyphosate patent. He later won the National Medal of Technology from President Reagan. Glyphosate is now the most widely used herbicide in the history of agriculture. Whether that is entirely good news is a question farmers, scientists, and regulators are still debating today. But the compound that remade agriculture started with one chemist, taking on a project nobody else would touch: the living world beneath the field. Soil microbiome research, 1990s, 2000s. For most of agricultural history, soil was considered a medium, a substrate, a place to put seeds and add nutrients. It was chemistry, not biology. Then the lab results started coming back from soil scientists in the 1990s and 2000s. And what they found changed the way the best farmers in the world think about what is under their fields. A single teaspoon of healthy soil contains more microorganisms than there are people on Earth. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, a living ecosystem of extraordinary complexity, one that had evolved over millions of years to cycle nutrients, suppress disease, build soil structure, and feed plant roots in ways that synthetic fertilizers cannot replicate. And conventional farming, with its heavy tillage, its persistent pesticides, its years of synthetic fertilizer application, had been quietly killing it, not dramatically, not all at once, but acre by acre, season by season. The living infrastructure of the soil was being depleted. The lab results didn't make front-page news. They filtered through quietly, through extension services, agricultural journals, the early adopters in the regenerative farming movement. But the farmers who read them, who understood what the numbers meant, they started farming differently: less tillage, cover crops to feed the microbial life, reduced synthetic inputs. The soil tests from Robert's Illinois farm, the ones that saved him $11,000 in fertilizer in 1983, were measuring chemistry. The soil microbiome research was measuring something deeper, something that the chemistry had been masking for decades. The result that came back from those laboratory tests is still reshaping American agriculture today, and most farmers have never read it. 5 lab results: a tube in Germany, a cornfield in Iowa, a greenhouse in Mexico, a vial in Missouri, a soil core on a laboratory bench. None of them were announced with fanfare. Haber's ammonia synthesis happened in a tube small enough to hold in one hand. Franz's glyphosate discovery came from a project nobody else wanted. Borlaug's dwarf wheat was developed in a research station far from the fields it would eventually feed. Wallace's hybrid corn was laughed at before it doubled the harvest of a continent. And the soil microbiome research, the results that are still reshaping farming right now, is still largely unread. by the majority of the farmers it affects. The history of agriculture is not a history of plows and tractors and the men who drove them. It is also a history of small rooms, quiet work, numbers on paper that nobody else was looking at, and scientists stubborn enough to keep looking until the world was ready to see what they had found. New stories every week on Deep Furrow.